G'day everyone, Mike here, and welcome to another edition of the Beyond Billables podcast. Wherever you're listening around the world, thank you for tuning in. And today's show is a really great chat I had with the legal beagle at Who Gives a Crap, Kate SHERBURN. Now, Kate will explain the meaning of that title. She is a leading in-house lawyer in Australia at an amazing company, and we spoke about her journey in the law. We spoke about Who Gives a Crap and what they're trying to achieve, and we spoke about the reality of juggling parenthood with lockdowns, COVID, work from home, and everything that everyone's had to do and continues to have to do. So I hope you enjoy the show. Kate, welcome to the Beyond Billables podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So what does a legal beagle do at Who Gives a Crap? And by the way, if you're listening around the world, I'm sure Kate can give some context to the company Who Gives a Crap.
Yeah, so Who Gives a Crap is our name. When I first started, I did have a few people say, "Where do you work?" And I would reply, "Who gives a crap?" And I'd get a funny look. And I realized that they thought I was being dismissive. A company called Who Gives a Crap. We sell toilet paper and paper towels and tissues, and now also drink blocks. And we are all of our products are sustainable. We donate 50% of our profits to sanitation charities. So that's a little bit about the company. I am the in-house counsel here at Who Gives a Crap. I'm the sole lawyer here at the moment. The title Legal Beagle is something that we created because we take what we do seriously, but we don't take ourselves seriously. So we like to have a little bit of fun with it. I was brainstorming titles that would work, and I have a beagle. So we thought that one was quite fitting. On a day-to-day basis, I do pretty much what all in-house counsels do, particularly sole in-house counsels, which is everything that comes across my desk. Yeah. You name it, I've probably done it at some point.
So how long have you been at Who Gives a Crap?
I just hit 2 years.
Right. Okay.
So it's, in one way, I'm an old hand at Who Gives a Crap. In other ways, it's still such a massive learning journey.
So let's go back to your start in the law. What made you become a lawyer? What was the impetus for you?
It was really quite random. I wasn't one of those people that would always wanted to be a lawyer, but I was in year 12 and I needed to choose a subject, and legal studies happened to fit in with my timetable and I loved it. So it was very random. But from that point, I thought, well, that's what I want to do. I want to go and study law. I studied law and psychology, which for anyone that has done that combination, it is a very, very long degree. I was 5 years into a 5.5-year course, and I was getting a little bit sick of study, and an opportunity came up to work as a paralegal at Cadbury Schweppes. I applied for it and I got it. And so I took 12 months off uni and I worked full time as a paralegal in the legal team there. I think I terrified my mum because she was so scared I wasn't going to go back and finish the last 6 months. But it was pretty much from that point that I realized how much I loved working in-house. It was really great to be part of that legal team. I learned so much there. And so I decided way back then that I eventually wanted to go in-house.
So you finished your studies. What was your first graduate role?
My first graduate role was in the graduate program at Norton Rose Fulbright. So although I did want to go in-house, the general consensus at that time was that you had to have experience before you went in-house. So I went and got that experience. I was in a corporate advisory team, which I really loved. There was only 5 of us in the team, so you really got to sort of sink your teeth into the work there. And I was there for 8 years. In that time, I had 2 children. And it was sort of about this time that I thought, no, I should make the move. I hadn't started actively looking, and someone told me about an opportunity that was 10 minutes from my house in an in-house role. And I don't live anywhere near the city. So to find a role that was 10 minutes from home was sort of a little bit too good to be true. So I followed that up, and that was at a TAFE in Victoria. And I started there as their first in-house counsel as well.
Right. So what was that like? Obviously going from private practice to a fresh role that no one else had even been in. That's quite daunting. What was what was that first year like?
It was a massive learning curve. I had done a lot of secondments while I was in private practice because it was something. But going from that support network of private practice to all of a sudden just being me, it was, well, completely honestly, it was terrifying when I first started it.
Yeah.
And the thing that allowed me to do it was I knew I had a really good support network around me. There were a lot of people whose experience I could draw upon to help and to guide me if I ever got stuck. But one thing that I found was once I was thrown in that deep end, I actually knew more than I thought I knew. And so there wasn't, although it was a massive learning curve, there was not a whole lot that completely sort of flummoxed me. I felt I could pretty much navigate most things, or I knew someone that could help me navigate it.
Yeah. So obviously coming from a corporate commercial team, you think you have a broad range of experience until you go in-house and it completely changes. I mean, when you had that work drop on your desk and you thought, who do I get help from here? How did you answer that? Did you already have a network in place, or were there other legal providers that you could lean on when you needed it? How did that process work?
So the business already had existing legal providers. It was a 30-year-old company, and they didn't have an in-house legal team. So they had obviously used external counsel quite a bit. And so they were a really good source of information, not only for assistance, but also they had a lot of the history. And also, having worked 8 years in private practice, including secondments and things like that, I did have a pretty good network by that stage. So even if I might not necessarily have known someone in that particular area that we needed help, I had enough people that I could reach out to say, hey, who would you recommend if I need help in this area?
So you spent some time there. Ultimately, what prompted the move to Who Gives a Crap?
This was another slightly random happening. I wasn't looking to move, and a friend of mine reached out and said, hey, I know someone that works at Who Gives a Crap, and they're looking at hiring a lawyer, but they haven't had this role before and they don't really know what it would look like. Do you think you could have a chat to them just to tell them what in-house lawyers do? Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. So I had a call with someone in the Who Gives a Crap team, and they'd sort of drafted a job description for this role that they were looking at. And they asked for my thoughts and input as to, were they asking the right thing? Was there anything that they'd missed? And I got out of that phone call going, I must work at that place. So I ended up applying for the role. It was a bit of a strange one because the role wasn't live yet. So I actually put an expression of interest before they'd even advertised it. And so it was quite a long process in the end.
Yeah, right.
Waiting for sort of them to play catch up for each step.
What was so interesting to you from that perspective?
Just really the passion that the people that I had spoken to really shone through. The fact that they were working towards something that was bigger than themselves. I really liked that sort of idea of purpose. And everyone that I'd spoken to, because there is quite a thorough recruitment process at Who Gives a Crap, and so I spoke to a number of people throughout that time, and it just shone through with everyone that I spoke to that they were all so excited to be working towards this sort of bigger goal, and they were some pretty amazing people. And I thought, wow, what an experience it would be to work there.
a lot of businesses talk about purpose and mission and these goals. How does Who Gives a Crap actually execute on it?
We have our big, hairy, audacious goal, and that is to make sure that everyone on Earth has access to safe water and a toilet. And literally every decision that is made, we look at it through that lens. Right. Will this help us achieve that goal? And it can seem a little bit strange when you're not in one of the impact teams, how it fits in. But even my role, every contract I review, that's the lens that you put on it. That's sort of something that is framing the advice that you give and the decisions that we make in the business.
Amazing. And so since you've been there, obviously the business has grown a lot. What was 2020 like? Because I mean, most people in Australia will know that about the toilet paper wars and about lockdowns, but obviously you're literally on the front line, because I remember the first time I came across Who Gives a Crap, I think was at the first lockdown or something. Someone in my team actually mentioned, because people were ordering on toilet paper online and getting that delivery. What was that process like as a business going from, I guess, and what has the growth story been?
I mean, it was crazy last year. It was certainly nothing that any of us could have foreseen. I can remember we were watching images of supermarkets with just bare shelves, toilet paper completely selling out. And someone said, "Oh, that wouldn't happen to us." And 3 days later, we were sold out. I mean, even now, we still can't quite work out how toilet paper became the hot commodity. But it was one of those things that we were all experiencing uncertainty in our personal lives as well, because the pandemic was new. We didn't know what was happening. We didn't understand it. So there was that sort of fear and anxiety around that side of it. And then we were also crazy busy at work. And we were all working from home, which is not unusual for us. We are a remote first business. And so while we do have offices in some of our hubs, most people work from home at least some of the time. So that wasn't that big of an adjustment. But because going into lockdown, you don't have the normal cues that would mean you stop work for the day. You're not picking the kids up from school. You don't have the extracurricular activities. And so that boundary between home and work really was starting to blur. And so one of the things that we really had to be conscious of was that people were working and working and working and not taking a break.
Yeah.
So we, that was an unusual challenge, I think, for our business. And because we are all a group of quite passionate people and a really collaborative group of people as well, I think people weren't taking any breaks because they felt that if they weren't working, they were letting other people down.
Yeah.
So in the end, the company just shut for a week.
Right.
Gave everyone a week off, so that we actually did get that downtime.
It's an interesting thing. And in a business like yours, who has been a distributed workplace for some time, I mean, these things have been discussed for many, many years, like for, at least the last decade or so, how you better manage people and how you can create systems and so forth. For a lot of law firms who were thrust into it, they really struggled with that, and some still are, and I think a lot of businesses kind of still are. I mean, apart from shutting down for a week, which is quite, amazingly extreme, what else goes on in terms of being able to manage that juggle, especially, you're in Melbourne, it's lockdown 6.0, and moving forward, there's a reality that we're probably going to be going through similar things for some time to come. How does the business better manage that now, especially it's actually a mature business? used to managing these things?
It was actually really interesting because when we all of a sudden went from having some hub locations and some people sort of working that hybrid model of half in the office, half at home, to completely working from home, we were a little bit cocky. We've got this, we've done this before. But it was actually surprising because losing that in-person element meant that some of those social interactions had been reduced. And so one of the things we did was we started having the first 5 minutes of every meeting as agenda free. You could just jump on, have a chat, see how people were going. We've introduced hub hangs. So based on time zones, we have a catch up once a fortnight, which can be organized to do something in particular, or it can just be a chat. Our US team recently had a pizza making session where they had instructions on how to make pizza dough and then sort of assembled it and cooked it and ate it together.
Wow.
on a call. But one thing that it really showed was that even though we had been doing this, we had kind of forgotten the people that didn't have access to a hub.
Yeah.
So the way that we work is if we have 5 or more people in a particular location, we can arrange for a co-working space. So we had one in LA and we had one in Melbourne.
Right.
But there were also people that were working outside of those areas. So we had a couple of people in New York who weren't attending our LA office. And I think before everyone was working from home, we hadn't incorporated the social aspect enough for the people that weren't near a hub.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely something we've learned and something that will continue even once the hubs reopen.
Yeah, amazing. I've seen a lot of businesses with literally cheerleaders coming on with their morning stand-ups in the US and other places, like people employed to literally be cheerleaders and run games with groups and things like that. But I guess as the general counsel, in-house counsel though, how did you manage feedback loops and how did you manage that contact point? Obviously, you are used to working remotely, so you probably had systems in place. But practically speaking, especially when you're having to wear lots of hats and deal with lots of different people, how did you manage that remotely?
So we're a pretty global team, and I am the only lawyer, and I'm obviously based in Australia. So time zones was already something that we were having to manage. From that practical perspective, we each have a document called how I work, and so it explains the time zones that you're on and when you are available and when you aren't available. So that's kind of that baseline access. But the thing that I was finding was that because we mainly use Slack, things were getting lost. The quantity of work that was coming through, it was just impossible to keep track. And I'm a very organized person and I had Google Sheets and lists and all sorts of things. And I was like, this isn't working. So we implemented a legal operations platform last year. So now all of our contracts are in one place. There's matter intake forms. People can get updated on their matters whenever they want to, not just when I can respond to them.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the really big things. Instead of it being reliant on me being on Slack to actually respond amongst many Slack messages, now they can log on to this platform and actually see the status of their matter and if there have been any updates to it.
Yeah, brilliant. Slack's very difficult. I mean, Slack's fantastic, but because of the chronological order of things, it's really, really difficult to, especially if you're running lots of different channels. We've moved into Notion ourselves as a project management tool, and we use Slack communication, but getting the right balance between things, and especially if you're working across time zones with people in the US who might be, want to at least see, at least there's progress on this. I don't need to chase Kate on it, or maybe, or maybe I do. So I guess from a practical perspective, obviously you set all of those things up. How did other law firms respond during this in terms of your providers? And a bigger question then, especially now moving forward, is, how is the flexibility of law firms and the way that they provide service to you, how does that affect who you choose to work with as an in-house counsel?
I think relationships, you don't get that sort of incidental catch-ups, I suppose, that you get when you are in person and sort of working in the same sort of areas as people. One thing that's really impressed me is if someone shows they're genuinely interested in our business and how we work, and where you form a genuine connection with somebody, it doesn't just feel like you're being sold to. I think if I've sort of got that relationship with somebody, even if I might not need their help at the moment, you're more likely to remember them if you come up with something that down the track that you're like, oh, yep, I know about this person. They sort of have expertise in this area. I'll go and talk to them. In terms of how things have changed from the working from home remote aspect, I think in some ways it can almost be easier to have those sort of catch-ups, because you can just have a sort of 10-minute Zoom call with someone or a quick email to, follow up on something that you might have spoken about, without it feeling like a big thing where you actually sort of go to a place and catch up with somebody. There are people that we have used from external firms that I have now never met in person. I have purely only engaged with them in the last sort of 16 months. And so, but I've seen into their homes. I've seen their children walk behind them. I've seen cats walk across keyboards. I actually think that helps develop the relationships.
Well, it's interesting though too, because it breaks down the geographical issues, and if they can stand out to someone like you and they can build that relationship on a level, it gives people that opportunity as well. Because unless you're in Melbourne back in the day, you wouldn't have been able to just have a coffee with Kate and build that relationship, or run into you incidentally at a legal event or function or a school function or whatever we spend our time, where we, build those relationships. But now they can. I mean, what gets your attention when you're looking in places, I guess, and who ends up standing out to you, that ultimately might end up being a relationship that you can build work around at some point?
Something that really stands out for me is if they can show that they understand our business, and that any advice they provide is something that I'm going to be able to directly communicate to the business, and that I don't have to spend a couple of hours translating it.
Yeah.
The reality of in-house legal work is that it is very different from private practice. And I know when I was in private practice, I always thought I was providing relevant commercial practical advice. And then I went in-house and I realized how far off the mark I was. It can be really hard to understand until you're in it. But if that step can be removed, where I don't have to be the intermediary in terms of being able to understand the advice, that's something massive for me.
So is that about how things are communicated, or because is that in the way that they communicate? Is it the way that they put themselves out there? Is it their accessibility? How does that actually translate into? Because a lot of lawyers, they want to build better relationships and better serve in-house counsel, and people talk about commerciality and all of these kind of buzzwords which don't mean a lot. But how does that effectively translate into something that you will think, wow, this is makes my life a hell of a lot easier? Is it legal design? Is it their communication style? Yeah. What is it?
It's sort of an element of all of it. One of the things that I have tended to find from advice that we've received from externals, particularly in sort of previous lives, is that you often put of text. When you're in house, you don't want that. Most of the time, the business, they want to know, can they do it or can't they do it? And if they can't, what are the other options?
Yeah.
And that information is tending to be in those advices, but you kind of got to dig around to find them.
Yeah.
So as lawyers, we obviously have to do all of that prep work, and that's fine. And that's great for me to have. But what we really need is something really concise and simple at the start that says, these are the answers. And if you don't have the context of the business, that can be harder to do. But I would prefer to have a phone call or conversation at the start of, engaging the external law firm so that they can ask as many questions from me, so they get all the information they need so that they can then provide that, because that's much easier from my perspective than trying to play catch up after the fact, where I've got this advice and then I have to sort of pull out the relevant information for the business.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. I actually see the way that a lot of lawyers communicate, and I try to help clients change it, actually, even in simple things like content and blogs and other things like that, that it's not telling a story to get to the end and then you tell what the outcome is at the end, but actually you've got to invert, and actually these are the key bits you need to know, and now I'll tell you about the why. And funny enough, though, because of a lot of the way we're taught and case studies and a lot of the way we go about things with the way we, frame advices and so forth, it's like laying out your reasons why, and then in a learned way based on those reasons why saying it. And it's just thinking about better ways to communicate that, because you're right, most people want the top line, and you still need those reasons why for lots of different reasons. But for you to make your life easier, it's not to, fish through it and try to work it out. And also, I guess if you can pass something on without having to double handle it, it just makes life a lot easier.
Yeah, and we're pretty good at this in Australia at using plain English, but there is a difference between plain English directed at lawyers and plain English directed at the business, because there are so many terms that don't really mean anything to most people.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that I'm certainly conscious of, and is really useful if our legal providers are conscious of that too.
So you were working from home beforehand, and then this explosion of work happened within the business, and obviously then COVID happened with lockdowns, and you're a mum of two. How did you manage the full-time practice, full-time work with everything else, and how do you continue to, with a big smile on your face like you've got today, Kate?
Well, once I figure it out, I will let you know. When we went into our first lockdown last year, I was only working 3 days a week, I think it was. And so that wasn't too bad. I was sort of managing it relatively well with the homeschooling. At work, we also were given unlimited leave if we needed it to help with everything else that was going on outside of our work lives. And one of our standard Slack statuses is actually parent duty, so you can just pop that on and while you're sort of dealing with other things. By the second lockdown, I was working 4 days a week, and I think even only that was our long lockdown, and not long into that I actually went up to full time. And I think the only way that we managed that was a huge amount of support from my workplace and also from my husband's workplace, and flexibility. So my husband he actually took a day a week off, but worked 4 days over 5 days. And I utilized the parent duty slack status so that I could sort of supervise. The theory here is that unless you're actually needed for a particular meeting or something, it doesn't really matter when you do your work. And we also have the availability to us to block out our calendars for things if we know it's sort of coming up. This year has been trickier because my son is in prep, and anyone that has tried to help a prep homeschool knows that it's not a matter of sort of set and forget. Like, you've got to be with them the whole time. The really big thing for us has been to try and keep some form of routine. Yeah. So we try and do the schoolwork relatively early in the day. I throw the kids outside for a little while. And we also embrace that you kind of get interrupted and you kind of have to make it work. Between the two of us, it's not been the easiest thing, and there have been countless times that we've been interrupted during calls. I mean, my favorite one was an external meeting last year. We had asked for a bit of quiet from the kids. So my son opened the door during this meeting and asked if flushing the toilet was going to be too noisy. When I assured him that no, it was fine, he came in not long after wearing absolutely nothing except a pair of boxer shorts, asking me to help him get dressed again. But I think everyone's in the same boat. So as long as you can kind of laugh along with it, and try and set boundaries. So my non-negotiable is I always have dinner with the family, and I always do their readers. That's the one thing that I do every night with them.
Yeah.
And then if I have to, then I might log on back, afterwards for a little while they've gone to sleep. But really trying to create those sort of that barrier between work and life, even when in reality it's becoming very blurred.
Yeah. I mean, how have you been able to manage your own, mental health and putting yourself and your health first in that regard? I mean, it's very difficult as a parent to ever do that, but it's also completely necessary. How have you managed that in the last year or so?
So exercise is something really important for me. It's one of those things I don't particularly enjoy it while I'm doing it, but if I don't do it, I start to get narky.
Yeah.
And so I prioritize that. So I make sure that I get out for a run a couple of times a week. When the kids are at school, I will walk them up to school. And during lockdowns in particular, we make sure that we try and get the dog, take the kids and we take the dog out for a walk sort of every day.
Yeah.
It can be really hard to prioritize self-care when you're in complete chaos. Work's busy, got kids at home. But it's that sort of, what they always say on the aeroplane, make sure you fit your own life mask, your own oxygen mask first.
Yeah.
It's something that it's not only acknowledged, it's really encouraged at Who Gives a Crap, is that we are people first, and you have to take care of yourself as a person before you take care of yourself before you sort of think of yourself as an employee. We have check-in surveys every week. And so that talks about how you are coping, if you've got any challenges, and it enables our people and culture team to reach out if people are experiencing challenges, but it also can see the trend of how everyone's going. And it was actually those surveys that prompted the week off that we had last year.
Yeah, amazing. So I guess you are at a place that is sensitive to these things, but as a whole, our industry has not been. And having spent some time, 8 odd years in private practice, and no doubt lots of friends in private practice still, how do you think, on the private practice side, we can better manage things? And how do you go about from a client perspective, because a lot of lawyers point to, well, client wants things too fast. That's why I have to do X, Y, and Z. How do you, manage your role as now a client and a leader and having an impact on that?
I think communication's the biggest thing. I mean, this is certainly how I feel, but I think I'd hope most people would feel this, that if someone isn't going to get something to you until later that night, or because of a particular reason, I think as long as you know that's going to happen, then that helps. There are obviously times when things are urgent, but things that are that urgent are fairly few and far between, where you don't have that flexibility. I think that's sort of the big one. And I'd like to think that things have changed or are changing now that everyone has been in this boat. But the other day my son was having a complete meltdown because he did not want to go onto his Zoom class. And so I just updated my status on Slack and sat with him for an hour, and we did some coloring, and he did join the call eventually. But this isn't a unique experience to me. Yeah. Everyone who has got their own challenges at the moment. And I think if you're open about it, people are more likely to be understanding. If you try and hide it, then people can't understand what's happening and can't provide that acceptance.
Yeah. So looking forward, what excites you about the future, Kate? What's coming up and what really excites you at Who Gives a Crap and about the profession as well?
One thing that really excites me is the business model of Who Gives a Crap. So it's sort of essentially something called consumer-driven philanthropy, which means that ultimately, if you're trying to seek donations, there's a limited pool of people and a limited pool of money that can go to charities. But everybody buys toilet paper and other products. So if you can increase that donation pool just because of an everyday product, then all of a sudden you've increased the potential of, that you've increased that pool of money without actually asking people for more money. So this is obviously how our business model works, but increasingly we're seeing other companies starting to do this. And I think that's really exciting, because there will be a tipping point at some point where consumers expect that sort of element. And I think that will really change the landscape.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think people look for it now, especially in different products where they can get a great product, but also it ticks that box. And I suspect that it's a lot more now than it ever was with just, a stamp of approval or anything like that. People actually want tangible outcomes and show that tangible outcome. And I think, yeah, you're 100% right. Like, other businesses will come along. If you look at the US, that's where a lot of this kind of happens a lot with B Corps and other things now. So yeah, that's really exciting. And I guess from a legal perspective, what in the profession, excites you, and what positive change have you seen in the last, even if it's incremental?
One thing that I am hoping to see, I think, is more opportunities for women in the legal industry. This seems a sort of a little bit of a strange statement, because the report was released last week or the week before that says there's actually now more females in the industry than males. But I think if you look at the spread, it's often at the more junior levels. And then once women continue through their career, they're often faced with a lot of barriers that mean they leave. And then you're losing this huge amount of talent and experience. Um, a lot of that is women who want to have families and careers. I know I was even when I was in private practice, I was in a really supportive group, and I still face a huge amount of challenges. And I think if you didn't have that support, which sort of enabled me to move through that, I can understand why people would leave. It would just simply become too hard.
Yeah.
And so I'd really like to see more women being able to progress through the ranks. Because ultimately, I think being a parent, which is where a lot of these sort of barriers arise, I think they make you a better lawyer. I mean, I'm certainly better at negotiating now since I've had to negotiate with little children. And you learn more about communicating to your audience.
Yeah.
I mean, at work, my audience is slightly different from my audience at home, but it does mean that you get very good at sort of changing up how you approach things. And I'm certainly much more productive now than I ever was before children.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to see that sort of being a little bit more acknowledged.
Yeah, well, and I think the profession is slow changing, but there have been changes. But companies like Who Gives a Crap, as from a real, corporate sense, show a different way of doing things that are responsive. And I personally think that the profession needs to look, away from the navel gazing and always looking inward and look outward to these kind of great examples for the answers. Because a lot of the time lawyers get together and lawyers talking about lawyers' problems with no real context, that there are answers from other industries and others doing it well. And I think the more that we see that, that bit over here, this is a bit that we can use. We can use that as part of our model. And maybe this is a bit over here we can use as part of the model. As an industry, we are outward looking to try to find the best bits of what's working for others. Then that can be implemented because it works, right? Because, the businesses that make it work have lower turnover, lower, attrition, those huge costs around those things. And over time, they show themselves as being successful and they make money, or they tick the box as to success, whatever that definition is for the organization. And that's going to be important for law firms as well. I mean, fundamentally, they want to be successful. So if other businesses can show a better way, then smart law firm owners and leaders can look at the Who Gives a Crap and think, wow, that's a great idea. We need to implement that.
Yeah, and I think that's the way that you keep the best, or you sort of attract and retain the best people. I look around at the people that I work with at Who Gives a Crap, and I've got some of the most amazing people that I really admire, and they've all got other things outside of their work life that make them better at their job. We've got people who do these amazing side hustles, or people that, again, they've got young children, but successfully navigating that and their career. And by doing that, they're showing to their children that it is possible to have a family and have a career that you love.
Yeah. Look, I think that's an amazing way to finish it, because I completely agree with you, and we need to support that for parents and more. So Kate, thank you so much. It was great meeting you for the first time on a Clubhouse talking about these types of things, and thanks so much for coming onto the show.
Thanks for having me. It was my pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to the Beyond Billables podcast. If you didn't know, we're actually a brand and marketing agency that helps law firms, legal tech startups, and legal services businesses around the world. Our focus is helping our clients build valuable long-term brands, and we do that through brand strategy, through branding and design, website builds, social media, and content projects. No matter where you are in the world, we've worked with firms for over 15 years in multiple jurisdictions, and we're always happy to chat. If you want to chat about a project, drop me an email at michael@beyondbillables.com or connect on social media. Thanks so much for listening to the show.